Welcome to Learn at Work podcast, which is sponsored by Work, a journal of prevention, assessment, and rehabilitation. We're delighted to host this podcast that will bring together insightful conversations and thought-provoking discussions on topics that matter most in the realm of health, rehabilitation, work, prevention, and assessment. What can you expect from our podcast? We'll have expert interviews, individuals who have published in the journal, and we'll dive into conversations with leaders who have shared their valuable experience and expertise. You'll learn about different latest work trends, technology, and best practices. I'm Karen Jacobs, the founding editor of Work, and I'm the moderator of these podcasts. Welcome to this episode of Learn at Work, the podcast for the journal Work. I am thrilled to have as our guest Lindsey Sousa, and I'm going to have Lindsey sort of reveal her role with Work. But first, Lindsey, can you give us a little bit of background about your career?
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to work with you and talk with you and to be part of the journal.
So, Lindsey, tell us about your career. What did you study in college?
I studied English. I was an English major with a minor in women's studies at Northeastern in Boston, so not too far from here. And what I really liked about Northeastern, what appealed to me, is it focuses on experiential education. And so along with our studies, we did the co-op program. And I know I had friends who would do co-op and found, oh, this is not the field for me. And then I was someone who was fortunate enough to get roles that were very interesting, that for me validated, that I really was always interested in publishing. And so was able to kind of start my co-ops, I was at a detective agency for a little while, helping editing their reports. I worked at Pearson over near South Station, and that was one where I really started being geared toward the educational market, because I was supporting them on some of their textbooks. And so after I graduated, looked for textbook education roles available to me, and I started with Jones and Bartlett Learning, and originally on the health administration and a public health list, which we then over time also added the public administration list, but got to be involved again in education and health, which is something that really speaks to me as well. I've been a lifelong athlete. Really am committed to movement is medicine, that, we don't just have a body, we are a body. And so that was also exposure to me to some, as public health, some of the bigger picture things that can impact individual health. And so that was very interesting to me to be in that role, to get exposed to that world, doing work that felt very fulfilling, helping connect professors to the right materials that they wanted for their course, and of course to the type of content that we had and that was available in that field, and exposing me to more concepts, because I wasn't necessarily exposed to the details of them as an English major, but in an area that was a liberal area, so had a little bit more exposure to the concepts overall, but then working on the books, getting a little bit more deeper into it, which just spoke to me. And so I felt very good about that. In time, though, I ended up stepping away when I started my family to focus a bit on that. And it was during that time that this journal became known to me. Someone else who was working at the journal and had to take a step away and asked, hey, do you know someone who would be interested in this role? And it just came at the perfect time where I was available, but it's just work that I love. And the journal was a topic I'm very interested in. We found each other. It just seemed kind of meant to be that I could accept it and start, and immediately just found that it resonated with me, not just, the journal and the topic, but also you and your approach and your personality. And it has become such a light and a positive aspect. I always kind of joke with my husband that it was, even though it was adding to our life during the crazy years of having two under two, but it actually created this counterbalance of having this thing that I could put on my professional hat and still explore my interests and my skills outside of the new roles I was taking on personally to still have that professionally and still aspects that really spoke to our life as well because I'll find myself reading articles about things that relate to either working from home for me or my husband's in construction, construction workers and using vibrators, which my husband does in concrete. There was articles about breastfeeding mothers or mothers. So it's one of those things that it speaks to everyone and it spoke to me and it fit into my life in so many perfect, beautiful ways that continues to enrich, I think, my life every day.
I love hearing that. And, from the moment we met, we've had such great chemistry. And you, as the editor's assistant, I depend on that you're able to vet any issues, that you interact again with our editorial board members, our reviewers, and our authors. You have a very, very important role, and I'm very grateful. I thought maybe our listeners might like to hear sort of a day in the life of an editor's assistant and maybe just touch on some of the roles that you play or the skills that are required.
Spend a lot of time contacting reviewers. um, we use Scholar One is our new platform that we use, and that kind of sets it up for me. But well, I'll usually try to do is, especially anything that is delayed. We really do try to get things in a timely fashion. We are beholden to the reviewers to accept and to respond. So I do try to spend probably a good portion of every day going through and seeing what papers are waiting for feedback and contacting reviewers to make sure whether you accepted this review and just keep in mind we're waiting for it, or also maybe finding replacement reviewers or someone hasn't responded. That's kind of how I'll start my morning, is seeing if there's any papers that are kind of waiting for too long to get some feedback on them. And we do always try to prioritize using the same reviewers throughout the process. That way it's consistent feedback. They're like looking at the feedback that they gave in the previous round. Unfortunately, that's not always possible, whether it's because the reviewer has now become unavailable, whether they're not being responsive, whether they were someone that was unwilling to look at the next round. And so I'll always make every effort I can to kind of reach out and just say, like, this was a revision based upon your input. We really hope that you'll stick with it. But there does come a point where we need to kind of decide that we need to move on to someone else so we can keep the paper moving. So that's why sometimes there might be a delay, and we regret that as much as the authors do, but it's because we're trying to do our due diligence to hopefully keep the same voices with the paper so you're not getting drastic different feedback, but also balancing that with, we don't want to keep your paper waiting for an undue amount of time, waiting for someone who's being unresponsive. So, and making sure that process was kind of running smoothly. As we get feedback back from reviewers, another step, I kind of will move on to looking at decisions that are necessary. And that's something that you and I correspond on daily, where I'm sharing with you, oh, okay, this reviewer said they had major revisions, this one said minor, and you'll look at that feedback and evaluate it. And I usually have a recommendation. Hey, I do make some good points here. What do you think these should be revised? And we'll go through that and evaluate the feedback and send a decision along. And sometimes the reviewers are in accord, and so they'll agree on something, and we're able to process along. And you and I will have a back and forth on that. When we get those decisions, we consider the paper and the feedback and process that along to the authors. Another part is new submissions. So when new submissions come in, we always do the system automatically does an authenticate report. Even a step before that report, you're also looking at as papers coming in, because especially with Sage now having a number of journals, sometimes we get things that aren't quite appropriate for work, which may be very interesting topics, but they don't necessarily touch on work, maybe. And so as those things come in, you'll kind of give me a heads up. You'll see the alert come in and be like, this is actually in our scope, or this is a bit too specialize. And so what we can do with that now is being able to move those papers to the stage path, which means that it can stay submitted with the publisher, but not the journal, but they can find another journal that's with Sage that might be appropriate. So that will be another part of my day where I'll kind of go through new papers. Anything that is not in scope, I'll go ahead and I'll move it to the stage path so they can try to submit to another journal that would be more appropriate for them to publish with. But those papers that are appropriate for a journal, then we'll be checking like the Authenticate report to make sure that it falls within our standards and making sure that it's blinded. We have a double-blind peer review. And so there shouldn't be any identifying information in the paper itself or any tables or figures or supplementary materials. Sometimes I have to send papers back, whether it's because there's, author's information or affiliations. We do also give authors an opportunity if a paper's score is 25% or more for the Authenticate score. We do send it back to them to give them an opportunity to revise and send the report with the revised section and share with them, hey, these are the areas that we need you to focus on to reduce the similarity. So sometimes there is some sending back, but if it clears the score, it's blinded, we can accept it and move it into the review process. And that's when it'll come back to me again, inviting more reviewers. I'll connect the paper with reviewers that have the expertise listed that have been highlighted in the paper. Now, we'll also get revisions back, revisions that have been resubmitted. And so for those, again, I'm looking over the paper, making sure it's blinded. Everything except the cover letter basically should be blinded. So I'm just double checking that their response to the reviewers and the paper itself doesn't have identifying information, but then trying to invite the previous reviewers, unless they have already accepted the paper, in which case, we only have the remaining reviewer to accept it, and going through and going through that process. So again, we spend a lot of time, reaching out to people. And there's direct emails that people request, if they need an extension on, their revision date, submitting their paper, if they need an extension to do their review, if they email me directly to decline a review, if they have questions and whatnot. And I try to kind of touch base with that throughout the day so that no one's waiting for undue time for a response. I try to keep it within the week, but also just prioritizing the papers themselves. And usually there's overlap there. And if someone has sent me a message, there's also a paper there, so I can connect the two and kind of address them simultaneously. But that's also an opportunity for connecting with authors, reviewers, yourself, our publisher. And so it's a lot. It's a very full day. And
as you're explaining your role, I think our listeners who are authors or potential authors would love to hear tips from you regarding submitting a paper. Are there checks that they should do before uploading something to Scholar One? You see so many papers that come in, perhaps with authors not reading the author's guidelines and having to be sent back.
I would say the biggest feedback would be to be ensured that it's blinded. I think that's the most common reason I have to send papers back. And whether it's because they include that information in their response to viewers, but I don't think they realize that the response is going to be visible to reviewers, and so they'll include identifying information, or sometimes it's file names. Sometimes they'll save the paper and their name will be in the file name, or they'll include their acknowledgement section or their ethical approval section that will have their affiliation. That's probably the number one reason I have to send papers back, is it includes those identifying information. There's a learning curve moving to Scholar One. So we did recently update some of the instructions to be a little bit clearer on this, whereas I think before the section for their response, it didn't clarify that was going to be visible to the reviewers. And that's why it's important, the conversation I have as well with authors and reviewers, with them asking questions about things, because that was brought to my attention so that I could request that our colleagues could update that.
Lindsey, besides being an editor's assistant, you have lots of other things that you love to do, and you were mentioning, athletics, sports, but you have other meaningful occupations. Can you share some of those with us? Then I want to conclude with, what's your why? What inspires you?
I'm an avid reader. Just in the journal itself, there's times I get pulled into some of these papers because they're interesting, and I read through them. So I'm an avid reader. I'm a big yogi, which I think is beyond just athletic, also that meditation aspect as well. I have two small children, so I'm very involved with them, and one of my sons is in Scout. The other right now is doing baseball. I love to cook, and I know that you have a cooking class, and I've done some of your
Thank you.
recipes. Yeah. Which, I enjoyed that. I just a very simple thing. To me, I find very simple things, like the simple joys in life, reading a great story, stretching, feeling good in your body, being with your family, cooking a meal, and then enjoying the fruit of your labors, and sitting down and enjoying a family meal with my family that feels good and feeds us body and
That's
soul.
fabulous. And what really motivates you each day? What gets you going?
Pretty intrinsically motivated. I feel good to get things done. I feel good to create harmony. I feel good and I'm motivated to help others, to connect. And, it starts with yourself, finding harmony within yourself. And then it, extends to your family, your friends, your community. That's one of the things that I find the journal supports all aspects for me because I think that it feeds my mind. It feeds me in the sense that I'm learning, I'm growing from it as well. I also feel I'm connected to my community, sharing this information, sharing this research, and connecting with people around the world. I love that feeling of connection of we're hearing stories from people on a different side of the world that who might live a very different lifestyle than I, and I'm able to read their stories. Maybe it's like nurses burnout in Turkey, or maybe it's about Chilean workers, and being able to share their story, to connect with their story, to be witness to their story, and then to share it around the world, and hopefully in those efforts, also improve everyone the way that I'm committed, I would say, to improving myself. So just like that with the journal, having that way to improve myself from my efforts on it and from what I learned from it and from the reward of helping it be a smooth, beautiful machine that also hopefully is improving the lives of others by sharing that information, sharing those experiences, those tips, those understandings of what can help the mother who's having postpartum or the factory worker who is getting a lower backache, and that this information, this data can improve their life. That makes me feel good. That it's from that core from yourself. My number one on my personal mission statement is to be a positive force in the universe. And I think doing this journal, I think, is a direct result. I do help raise the bar a little bit from my day to hopefully
Wow,
people's day
you
all
certainly
around the
do.
world.
And I just want to thank you for your commitment to the journal, the joy it is to work together, and thank you for being a guest on Learn at Work. Lindsey, if somebody wants to ask a question that maybe you can answer for the journal, what email would be best for them to use?
And I would love that work journal assistant at outlook.com and WORKJOURNALASSISTANT at outlook.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Questions are great because those help to lead my attention places that maybe it isn't, or to think about things that I haven't thought of. So I would encourage, please, you reach out. Always happy to help.
Thank you. And we encourage you to submit your papers to our journal work. Thank you, everyone. And Lindsey, thank you.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.